The following is Srila Prabhupada's summary of Bhagavad Gita as found in the purport to Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 15, Text 27. Herein, Arjuna refers to the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, which was imparted to him by the Lord on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Krishna left behind him the instructions of Bhagavad Gita not for the benefit of Arjuna alone, but also for all time and in all lands. Bhagavad Gita, being spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the essence of all Vedic wisdom. It is nicely presented by the Lord Himself for all who have very little time to go through the vast Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, Puranas, and Vedanta Sutras. Indeed, it is put within the study of the great historical epic Mahabharata, which was especially prepared for the ordinary human being. The problem which arose in the heart of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was solved by the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. And again, after the departure of Krishna from the vision of earthly people, when Arjuna was face to face with being vanquished, even with his acquired power and prominence, Arjuna wanted once again to remember the great teachings of Bhagavad Gita. And this was just to teach all concerned that Bhagavad Gita can be consulted in all critical times, not only for solace from all kinds of mental agonies, but also for the way out of the great entanglements which may embarrass one in some critical moment. Thus, the merciful Lord Krishna left behind him the great teachings of Bhagavad Gita so that one can take instructions from the Lord even when Krishna is not visible to our material eyesight. We should know that our material senses cannot have any estimation of the Supreme Lord, but by Krishna's inconceivable power, He incarnates Himself to the sense perception of the conditioned souls in a suitable manner through the agency of matter, which is only another form of the Lord's manifest energy. Thus, Bhagavad Gita, or any authentic scriptural sound representation of the Lord, is also the incarnation of the Lord. For there is no difference between the sound representation of the Lord and the Lord Himself. If one can accept this, then one can derive the same benefit from Bhagavad Gita as Arjuna did in the personal presence of Krishna. That faithful human being, desirous of being liberated from the clutches of material existence, can very easily take advantage of Bhagavad Gita. And with this in view, Krishna instructed Arjuna as if Arjuna were in need of it. Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya. Part 2. In Bhagavad Gita, 5 important factors of knowledge have been delineated pertaining to Ishvara, the Supreme Lord; Jiva, the living being; Prakriti, material nature; Kala, eternal time and space; Karma, the process of activity. Out of these, the Supreme Lord and the living being are qualitatively one. The difference between the two has been analyzed as the difference between the whole and the part and parcel. Prakriti is inert matter, displaying the interaction of 3 different modes, and eternal time and unlimited space are considered to be beyond the existence of the material nature. The activities of the living being are different varieties of aptitudes which can either entrap or liberate the living being within and without material nature. All these subject matters are concisely discussed in Bhagavad Gita, and later the subject matters are elaborated in Srimad Bhagavatam for further enlightenment. Out of the 5 subjects, the Supreme Lord, the living entity, material nature, and time and space are eternal. But the living entity, nature, and time are under the direction of the Supreme Lord, who is absolute and completely independent of any other control. However, the Supreme Lord is the supreme controller. The material activity of the living being is beginningless, but it can be rectified by transferal into spiritual quality. Thus, it can cease its material qualitative reactions. Both the Lord and the living entity are cognizant, and both have the sense of identification of being conscious as a living force. But the living being, under the condition of material nature, called Mahat Tattva, misidentifies him or herself as being different from the Lord. The whole scheme of Vedic wisdom is targeted to the aim of eradicating such a misconception and thus liberating the living being from the illusion of material identification. And when such an illusion is eradicated by knowledge and renunciation, the living being becomes a responsible actor and enjoyer also. The sense of enjoyment in the Lord is real, but such a sense in the living being is a sort of wishful desire only. This difference in consciousness is the distinction of the 2 identities, namely the Lord and the living being. Otherwise, there is no difference between the Lord and the living being. The living being is therefore eternally one and different simultaneously from the Lord. And therefore, the entire instruction of Bhagavad Gita stands on this principle, which is known as Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. Vasudeva Paraveda, Vasudeva Paramukha, Vasudeva Parayoga, Vasudeva Parakriya, Vasudeva Parangyanam Vasudeva Parantapaha Vasudeva Paradharmo Vasudeva Paragataki. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Part 3. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord and the living being are both described as Sanatan, or eternal, and the Lord's abode, which is far beyond the material sky, is also described as Sanatana. The living being is invited to live in the Sanatana existence of the Lord, and the process which can help the living being to approach the Lord's abode, where the liberated activity of the soul is exhibited, is called Sanatana Dharma. However, one cannot reach that eternal abode of the Lord without being freed from the misconception of material identification, and Bhagavad Gita gives us the clue how to achieve this stage of perfection. The process of being liberated from the misconception of material identification is called, in different stages, fruitive activity, empiric philosophy, and devotional service, up to the point of transcendental realization. Such transcendental realization is made possible by dovetailing all the above items in relation with the Lord. Prescribed duties of the human being, as directed in the Vedas, can gradually purify the sinful mind of the conditioned soul and raise him or her to the stage of knowledge. And the purified stage of acquiring knowledge becomes the basis of devotional service to the Lord. But as long as one is engaged in researching the solution of the problems of life, then one's knowledge is called jnana, or purified knowledge. But upon realizing the actual solution of life, one then becomes situated in the devotional service of the Lord. Bhagavad Gita begins with the problems of life by discriminating the soul from the elements of matter, and proves by all reason and argument that the soul is indestructible in all circumstances, and that the outer covering of matter, the body and the mind, change for another term of material existence which is full of miseries. Bhagavad Gita is therefore meant for terminating all different types of miseries, and Arjuna took shelter of this great knowledge which had been imparted to him by Krishna during the Kurukshetra battle at its beginning. Part 4. Since the Lord is absolute, deep meditation upon Krishna is as good as yogic trance. The Lord is non-different from his name, form, quality, pastimes, entourage, and specific actions. Arjuna began to think of Lord Krishna's instructions to him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. For only those instructions began to eliminate the tinges of material contamination in the mind of Arjuna. Lord Krishna is like the sun. The sun's appearance means immediate dissipation of darkness or ignorance, and Krishna's appearance within the mind of the devotee can at once drive away the miserable material effects. Lord Chaitanya has therefore recommended constant chanting of the name of God for protection from all contamination of the material world. The feeling of separation from the Lord is undoubtedly painful to the devotee, but because it is in connection with the Lord, it has the specific transcendental effect which can pacify the heart. Such feelings of separation are also sources of transcendental bliss, and they are never comparable to contaminated material feelings of separation. Material desires within the mind are the trash of material contamination. By such contamination, the living being is faced with so many compatible and incompatible things, which discourage the very existence of spiritual identity. Birth after birth, the conditioned soul is entrapped with so many pleasing and displeasing elements, which are all false and temporary. They accumulate due to our reactions to material desires. But when we get in touch with the transcendental Lord in his variegated energies by devotional service, the naked forms of all material desires become manifest, and the intelligence of the living being is pacified in its true color. So as soon as Arjuna turned his attention towards the instructions of Krishna as inculcated in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's true color of eternal association with Krishna became manifest, and thus Arjuna felt freed from all material contaminations. The conditioned soul is enwrapped in his or her fruitive activities by the force of eternal time. But the Supreme Lord, when he incarnates on earth, is not influenced by that kala, or the material conception of past, present, and future. For the activities of the Lord are eternal, and they are manifestations of Krishna's Atma Maya, or internal potency. And so, all pastimes or activities of the Lord are spiritual in nature, but to the ordinary layman, they appear to be on the same level with material activities. It so appeared that Arjuna and Krishna were engaged in the battle of Kurukshetra, just as the other party was also engaged. But factually, the Lord was simply executing his mission of incarnation and association with his eternal friend Arjuna. Therefore, such apparently material activities of Arjuna did not drive him away from his transcendental position, but on the contrary, revived Arjuna's consciousness of the songs of the Lord as Krishna sang them personally to Arjuna on the battlefield. This revival of consciousness is assured by Lord Krishna in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Manmana bhava madbhakto madyaji mang namaskuru mam evaishyasi satyang te pratijane priyosi me. One should think of Krishna always. The mind should not forget Krishna at any time. One should become a devotee of Krishna and offer obeisances unto Krishna. One who lives in this fashion becomes undoubtedly endowed with the blessing of the Lord by achieving shelter of his lotus feet. And there is nothing to doubt about this eternal truth, because Arjuna was Krishna's confidential friend. The secret was disclosed to him. Arjuna had no desire to fight with his relatives, but he fought for the mission of the Lord. Arjuna was always engaged in the execution of Krishna's mission only, and therefore, after Krishna's departure, Arjuna remained in the same transcendental position, even though it appeared that Arjuna had forgotten all the instructions of Bhagavad Gita. One should therefore adjust the activities of one's life in pace with the mission of the Lord, and by doing this, one is sure to return home back to Godhead. This is the highest perfection of human life. Doubts of duality begin from the misconception of the material body, which is accepted as the self by less intelligent persons. The most foolish part of our ignorance is our identifying this material body with the self, and everything in relation with the body is ignorantly accepted as our own. Doubts due to misconceptions of myself and mine, in other words, my body, my relatives, my property, my wife, my children, my wealth, my country, my community, and hundreds and thousands of similar illusory contemplations cause bewilderment for the conditioned soul. However, by assimilating the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, one is sure to be released from such bewilderment, because real knowledge is knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, Lord Krishna, is everything, including one's self. So, everything is a manifestation of Krishna's potency as part and parcel. The potency and the potent are non-different, so the conception of duality is at once mitigated by attainment of perfect knowledge. As soon as Arjuna took up the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, expert as he was, Arjuna could at once eradicate the material conception of Lord Krishna, his eternal friend. Arjuna could realize that Lord Krishna was still present before him by Krishna's instruction, by Krishna's form, by Krishna's pastimes, by Krishna's qualities, indeed, everything else related to Krishna. So, Arjuna could realize that his friend, Lord Krishna, was still present before him by Krishna's transcendental presence in different non-dual energies. And there was no question of attainment of the association of the Lord simply by another change of body under the influence of time and space. By attainment of absolute knowledge, one can be in association with the Lord constantly, even in this present lifetime, simply by hearing, chanting, thinking of, and worshiping the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. And one can see Krishna, one can feel Krishna's presence, even in this present life, simply by understanding the Advaya Jnana Lord, or the Absolute Lord, through the process of devotional service, which begins with hearing about him. Lord Chaitanya says that simply by chanting the holy name of God, one can at once wash off the dust on the mirror of pure consciousness. And as soon as this dust is removed, one is at once freed from all material conditions. To become free from material conditions means to liberate the soul. Therefore, as soon as one is situated in absolute knowledge, one's material conception of life is removed, or he or she emerges from the false conception of life. In this way, the function of the pure soul is revived in spiritual realization. This practical realization of the living being is made possible due to one's becoming free from the reaction of the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. By the grace of the Lord, a pure devotee is at once raised to the eternal abode of the Absolute, and there is no chance of the devotees becoming materially entangled again in conditioned life. However, one is not able to feel the presence of the Lord in all circumstances until one is endowed with the required transcendental vision, which is made possible by devotional service prescribed in the revealed scriptures. Arjuna had already attained this stage long before on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and when Arjuna apparently felt the absence of the Lord later, Arjuna at once took shelter of the instructions of Bhagavad Gita and was thus again placed in his original position. And this is the position of Vishoka, or the stage of being freed from all grief and anxieties.